Welcome into another edition of Carps Corner. And as promised, wanted to deliver just an Ohio State Pro Day breakdown. And this will be highly specific here for just the Buckeye fans out there trying to figure out exactly what's going on and want to learn a little bit about their players as they're passing on to the next level, and ultimately how they performed, who was there, and what Pro Day is all about and what it ultimately looks like. And so I will say this: Mickey Marotti, the strength coach at Ohio State, he's in charge of putting on the Pro Day, really runs one of the most efficient Pro Days you're going to find, anywhere in the country. They get the guys in there, they get them heighted, they get them weighed, they get their hand measurements, they get all this stuff done beforehand. They have their meetings, they take their tests, they do all those things. And so they're ready to go. And it started about noon, and they wrapped that thing up pretty quickly at about 2:00. Not the biggest Pro Day in the world, but it was important, for maybe the top two guys, Olave and Garrett, and we'll get into why. The receivers, it was a big day for them potentially. As we know that they're first rounders, most likely both of them at this point with how well they performed at the combine. But Pro Day is kind of its own beast, and it allows them to kind of take a deeper dive. But there were some performers and some guys that I think really up their stock. And then, injuries are part of the game. And unfortunately for one guy, it wasn't necessarily an opportunity to display the talents I think that he would have hoped. But starting now, let's take a look at who was at Pro Day. This is something that usually happens at Ohio State. Part of the reason is your sheer proximity for Columbus. You've got Pittsburgh, you have Detroit, you have Indy, you have Cleveland, you have Cincinnati, not to mention, Nashville's, a relatively quick flight. Buffalo's not terribly far. So you have a number of teams within a 3-hour drive, 5-hour drive. And at that point, they're taking a private jet anyway. And so they're in and out, 45 minutes to be able to get down, get landed, and get where they need to go. Then get into airport real close to the campus. And so you're going to get some head coaches there. You're going to get some general managers, and you're going to be well represented always in that category. That's usually why you see guys like Mike Tomlin coming over, and, maybe whoever's coaching, the Browns or the Bengals in recent years have been there a lot as well. And Detroit, like I said, just because it's so easy to get there. But this year you had Commanders coach Ron Rivera came in. Houston Texans new head coach Lovie Smith, and then Mike Vrabel, the Titans head coach. Now Lovie and Mike are unique because Mike played at Ohio State, coached at Ohio State from the state of Ohio, and so it's natural for him to say, "Hey, I want to get back here and check out some of the guys and understand what it is we're looking at." And it's a chance for him to kind of come home, catch up, and see some folks. And then there's a good chance Cincinnati's Pro Day was the following day that he slides down there, checks out what Cincinnati's got going on with, Ritter, Bryant, and Gardner, three pretty elite players that have a chance to be coming out this year. We'll see how ultimately good they are and where they get drafted. But go see his buddy Luke Fickell too. And then Lovie Smith, who also coached at Ohio State in the mid-90s. So, he's got a little bit of a tie here. There's always a draw and a pull for people to come back to Columbus. And the reality of it is too, scouts, owners, GMs, front office individuals, head coaches, like they don't necessarily hate coming to Columbus, Ohio, because it's easy to get in and out of. And it's a lot better to get some food than maybe some smaller areas, in smaller college towns that don't have a nice restaurant or something to go out to eat the night before Pro Day. But enough of all the pleasantries. This is a Ohio State draft class, top heavy in wide receivers, no defensive backs or linebackers really to speak of. Got a couple of offensive linemen, a couple of defensive linemen. Those guys are real hard to judge in combine and at the combine and at Pro Day, simply due to the fact that it's such a physical position that you really need pads. A lot of the others, you can see guys work through space and understand what they are and have a pretty good feel when you pair with their tape. But, you get a lot more if you're an offensive or defensive lineman, especially out of the Senior Bowl, than you potentially would a Pro Day or a combine. Master Teague there at running back. And so we'll start with the two lead dogs here, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. Both of them ran extremely well at the combine. So they didn't need to come in and run their 40 again. They didn't need to test again. They did everything they needed to do in Indy and did it really, really well. And so that's what you usually see. Guys who perform well at combine don't usually replicate those same exact tests at Pro Day. Maybe they have one that they may want to clean up here or there, but a lot of them aren't going to sit here and say, I want to go continue to prepare to run a 40 because it's not really football specific. It's not necessary. So those guys didn't participate in any of the actual testing. What they were there for, and this is what they finished up with, was the routes. And the fact that Ryan Day coached in the NFL for a number of years, he was putting them through, the entire route workout and stuff that, he gets input from NFL, scouts and coaches of what they want to see. But Ryan understands that. And so he puts them through the whole route tree, both sides of the field running around. And I'll tell you this, these guys look good. They look good in their short range stuff, their short routes, their mid-range routes. They were cutting on dimes, and they looked really good on their deep balls. And we'll get into who was throwing to them in a minute. But both of those guys, I thought, fared very well. Olave looked as graceful as ever. When he runs, folks, he looks like he's running on water. A lot of scouts that I talked to there said they were surprised that he ran as fast as he did at the combine. Like, the guy doesn't look like he's ever running that hard. Well, that's the testament of any true speed guys. It looks effortless. They don't have to put a lot of effort into running. And Chris Olave is one of those guys. And he obviously checks the box of the deep threat. And that's what he's really best at. He can do everything. But his bread and butter, top of the route tree, 9, 8, 7, does a great job of slants, downfield breaking routes because he's so smooth. He can get in and out and run his outs and your digs and your comebacks, and did a good job of that. But he's so fast over the top. He's pretty long, and he does a great job of tracking that deep ball coming over your head. It's very, very difficult, and something that people probably don't truly appreciate is how hard it is to bring that thing over your shoulder, catch it in your periph, and then be able to cradle that down while you're running full speed. So big news for him being able to get that done. Did a really good job. So great to see that. Garrett Wilson caught everything as well. He's a really great contested ball catcher and does a good job running routes with guys on his hip in tight coverage scenarios. Does a good job of being able to adjust to the football, going and getting it. And big hands, strong hands, didn't drop any. I don't believe dropped a ball, at least not that I saw. It was very, very impressive for all of the coaches and all of the scouts. So both of the receivers, from everybody that I talked to, they did exactly what they needed to do. They went out there, they looked just as impressive. They wowed everybody and turned a lot of heads. Now, the guys that were throwing to him was pretty interesting. The Cardale Jones, who, is going out there and trying to put on his display of his talents one more time, see if he get picked up and get another shot in the league. If he does, great. I think if he doesn't, he's fully at peace with that. But he looked good. He missed on a handful of balls, and Stroud, there was maybe one or two he wanted to have back as well. But Cardale being able to zing it, and you saw that zip coming out of his hand. But the real story here was CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud looked really good at Pro Day. His ability to spin the football, dropping back, his drops look clean. Ryan had him moving in and out of the pocket as part of some of the route progressions and breaking things off and scramble drill, going deep. And Stroud looked good, sliding around. He throws, folks, one of the prettiest balls you'll ever see. Flips it out, but looked composed. I think everybody was impressed with how the ball came out of his hand, his delivery, and the rapport of which he was able to work with both Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. Did a fantastic job. And so CJ Stroud, I think the unsung hero and maybe the untold story for this pro day, because he's not draft eligible yet. So they're going to have to wait another year. But the whispers and some of the rumblings were the same things I heard last year when you had Jackson Smith and Jigba, Chris Olave, some of the other young wideouts going through pro day. Everybody sat there and said, wow, can we draft some of these guys? The Garrett Wilsons, the guys who are running through this, like looking at them coming in and out of their breaks, everybody was enamored with them, and they had to wait another year. So they'll have to wait one more year for CJ Stroud, but really looked good and was really, like I said, kind of the untold story that, we'll talk about today. But those NFL scouts, the head coaches, the front office execs, everybody that's there, they're writing it down. They're making notes and saying, hey, you know what? If we don't like a quarterback this year and we feel like we might be in the market, next year, the year after, like maybe we can press pause for it seem like the Falcons, the Saints, whoever it might be, Saints, player personnel director, I think assistant GM now, Jeff Ireland, was there. And don't think for a second, like, he's not looking at this. I don't think they believe Jameis Winston's probably their long-term answer. And so looking at CJ Stroud, potentially this could be the guy in the future. And you know what? The Saints, they love Buckeyes. And so that would be a big, big signing for them potentially to be able to draft him in the future. And so that's part of the long game that some of these teams play. They realize this year might not be a great crop. We'll get a quarterback that can kind of be a bridge guy. We've heard that term before. And then maybe you look at a CJ Stroud ultimately next year. One of the guys that was catching passes from him, Master Teague. So Master Teague had, kind of an up and down career at Ohio State. Started off as a freshman backing up Dobbins, was tremendous. He was the big hammer, the change of pace, the finisher, and it was ebbed and flowed a little bit with some of the other backs that came in and maybe didn't get quite as many touches to finish out his career as he would have liked. But if you look at Master Teague, this is what he's bringing to the table. Really smart kid, top quality human being, cares about football, smart guy, checks all the boxes for all the intangibles you need. Linear speed is fantastic. 4.4 guy out of the box. Physically built, looked good, looked very strong. You see these guys trot out there. They've got glorified underwear on. They call it, basically the underwear Olympics, walking out in spandex. You see all the muscles rippling, weighed in about 220, looked even bigger, but was so lean, looked athletic, strong, pretty good running through some of the drills, looked impressive doing that. But what everybody wanted to see was his fluidity, his change of direction. Those were the questions about Master Teague. Could Master Teague answer the question? Is he a little bit stiffer than what maybe you thought? On tape, he gets locked in and you see him kind of being a classic railroad runner. I'm going to this hole. I'm going to hit it going 1,000 miles an hour. Whoever's there, come hell or high water, I'm going to plow him over. And he had the physical attributes to do that and the speed to get there a lot of times. But when people wanted to see is, hey, is he a little more fluid? Does he have some sidestep? Are his hips a little looser? Can he be effective in the passing game? So running through drills, I thought he handled it pretty well and fared pretty well as well. Like as far as what the expectations were, he's never going to be, as loose in the hips as Trey Sermon or have the jump cut of J.K. Dobbins, but he's a lot bigger than those guys. And so I thought for his size, he looked fairly fluid. He caught the ball well. He looked good in his routes. He didn't look stiff. And so those were the questions that he ultimately needed to answer. And I thought Master Teague did a pretty good job of answering those. And probably going to come in, change a pace running back, be a guy that has to play a little bit on special teams. But if you were there and you were a scout and you were watching, looking for a running back that you could have come in and be a short yardage goal line guy and be a great special teams dude, I think Master Teague checked those boxes for you. And he has the intangibles because he's going to come in, work hard, and never be an issue. Huge for him. The last skill guy I'm going to talk about on the offensive side, Jeremy Ruckert. Unfortunate for Ruck, he's got good film as a blocker. I think people were impressed with him of how much he improved from his freshman year to his senior, his last year at Ohio State. Looked really good doing that. But he's a really good athlete. Weighed in at over 250 pounds. He's 6'3" and up, physically built, looks the part, and he's real fluid as a runner. Now, unfortunately, couldn't participate in the routes at pro days, battling, a plantar fascia issue. And that's going to be something that's going to linger. And I don't know if he's going to even get a chance to really work out for the scouts, for the teams prior to the draft. It's going to be pushing right up against the edge. And at some point, do you really want to rush it and risk re-injuring it if you're not fully healed? And so because of that, he's probably going to fall, but he's going to be a steal for somebody based upon you watch his film. He didn't catch a lot of balls at Ohio State. This is a 5-star kid coming in who is really fluid with how he runs his routes. He's got nice hands. He has good spatial awareness on the field, understands how to sit down in the zone. And so Ruck's checking those boxes. Problem is nobody got to see him run around. And when you're a tight end in Ohio State over the last 2 decades, you haven't really caught a lot of balls usually. And so that's the question mark. That's what they wonder. You're big, you're an athlete. We can see it on film. We watch your blocking, but we don't know how you act in the passing game. And so you can see the spacing. I've seen Ruck enough in practice to know that won't be an issue. And someone's going to probably get a steal because he'll be undervalued, just given his lack of ability to prepare for the combine and his inability to go out there and show out due to performance. Offensive side of the ball still, Nicholas Petit-Frere, Thayer Mumford, both guys looked physically good. That's part of the reason for offensive linemen. They want to make sure these guys don't look sloppy and fat. One of the questions for Nicholas Petit-Frere was his weight, weighed in at 315 pounds, which is a solid weight for him. He's battled that his whole career. He's a lean guy by nature, but weighed in heavy. And then both of those guys, you can't really hammer on guys. You can just shuffle around and punch pads. But what they want to see is, can you bend? Can you sit down, bend your hips, bend your knees, and be able to get down, absorb a bull rush, something that both of those guys had some trouble with, in the final game of the regular season against Michigan. Can you squat down? Do you have good power there? And can you bend? Are you fluid or are you stiff? And both of them, I thought, moved very well. They sank their hips really nice. They had good, powerful punches, looked under control for the entirety of their position drills, and I thought were pretty impressive. And so you don't really get a chance to see a lot of those guys because they don't have pads on and you can't really watch them go and try to drive a guy out. But for what you were able to show, I thought both of those guys handled themselves well and didn't disappoint or have any red flags being raised, which is really what you want to avoid. And for an offensive lineman, there's limited upside you're going to be able to gain. You just want to make sure you can answer all those questions. You don't fire up any red flags. Both those guys, I thought, did a pretty good job of that. And then lastly, you're going to finish up the two defensive linemen that were out there, Haskell Garrett, Tyreek Smith. Tyreek, people see his athleticism. You see flashes of him on the field. You also see some plays talking to scouts. They're like, they had you wondering. There's a big variation in play. I think a lot of Buckeye fans that watch the games would understand that Tyreek Smith had some great plays and could do some really good things. And then also times disappeared and maybe wasn't as stout in the run game as you would have liked. But watching him move through the bags, I thought looked good running a 40, looked smooth. He looked fluid. He looked like the type of athlete that you want to have being able to play on the edge that could maybe be, a 2 to 3 down player for you. He's got some work to do, but he has the length, he's got the build, and he has the athleticism to where if he develops that consistency against the run to pair with some of the flashes you see against the pass, he'll be pretty good. And he showed that being able to move through the bags. And I thought loose hips, good in the pass rush, running the hoop because they want to see how you can bend, you can run that corner and run the hump as they call it. And Tyreek did a good job of that. Haskell Garrett, a little bit different defensive tackle inside, looked pretty good, moving laterally. He's a pretty athletic 3-tech, not the biggest guy you're going to find inside. So his athleticism needs to be, on point. Probably slid a little bit in draft boards since the beginning of the season to where we're at now. He's banged up a little bit during the year, but he's a fast, penetrating guy. And I thought he showed that for the most part. When you have a defensive end and a D tackle side by side, defensive end's always going to look better because they're just a more athletic position. But I thought Haskell did a pretty good job. And like I said, it's the same thing with the offensive line. Defensive tackles, you can't really show off any pass rush moves. You can just show that you can move through space and how explosive you are. And Haskell Garrett did a pretty good job of that. Not the best attended pro day you're going to find for Ohio State. The NFL Network was there, which was big. It's the first time that I remember them being there and filming a lot of that live and going to it. So that was nice. You didn't necessarily have, the big ESPN, the big Big Ten Network, Fox, all here locked in like you did with Justin Fields. But that's just a function of having a quarterback, that was going to be a first-round guy, potential fringe top 10, top 5 player. And so it wasn't quite, that heralded as it was in the past. But there was a good media contingent. The guys performed well, ton of scouts, ton of coaches, and all the things that you would expect, from Ohio State Pro Day. And one of the things Ryan Day has done a really good job of, and Urban Meyer kind of started this is, hey, we're going to let some of the media in here. We're going to get some of this broadcasted, get some social media feeds going, and allow them to push it out to help build the hype for the program. Because that's a lot of what this is about, And so you got some underclassmen, CJ Stroud going out there, helping to set up his draft stock for next year and the expectations for him. And then everybody else, I thought fared pretty well. No one looked sloppy fat. Everybody moved pretty well. No one looked completely out of shape. And so if you check those boxes and no one else also got hurt, it was a pretty successful pro day. So that is the update for everything that we've seen and everything I kind of witnessed, and talking to some of the scouts and coaches and the guys that I know for what was there. But a lot of wide receiver position coaches were there. Buffalo's wide receiver position coach, Chad Hall, brother-in-law of Matt Stafford. He was there. He had nothing but glowing things to say, about the receivers as well. So just a lot of positivity. And I think both of those guys really, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, solidified themselves as first rounders. And we'll see kind of where everyone else falls here in a couple of weeks as the NFL draft looms. So thanks for another edition, Buckeye edition, Pro Day edition of Carps Corner. Talk to you soon.